Omaha, Nebraska. A quiet, simple American city. Far from Wall Street, far from the spotlight. But in 1930, during the darkest days of the Great Depression, a boy was born here who would go on to become one of the richest men in the world. His name? Warren Edward Buffett. He came from a modest, middle-class family. His father, Howard, was a stockbroker. His mother, Layla, was a homemaker. Times were hard. Jobs were disappearing. Banks were collapsing. Families struggled to afford even the basics. But inside their small home in Omaha, a young boy was already thinking about money. Not in a greedy way, but in a curious, almost mathematical way. While other kids played with toys, Warren played with numbers. By age 6, he was running his first business, selling chewing gum door to door in his neighborhood. He soon added Coca-Cola bottles and magazines to his little shop. He wasn't playing games. He was learning about profit, even if it was just pennies at a time. At age 7, Warren found a book that would change his life. 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. That's when a light bulb went off. He realized something powerful. You don't have to work for money. You can make money work for you. From that moment, he was obsessed. By age 10, Warren had already visited the New York Stock Exchange. While most kids were excited by cartoons, Warren was excited by ticker tapes and stock prices. And then came the moment that marked the beginning of it all. At just 11 years old, Warren bought his first stock. 3 shares of City Service Preferred at $38 per share. He bought one for himself, and 2 for his sister Doris. He was nervous. He had saved every penny for this moment. But he wasn't afraid. He was thinking long-term, even as a child. The stock dropped to $27. Warren panicked, but he didn't sell. He waited. Finally, the price rose to $40. Relieved, he sold the shares and made a tiny profit. But just a few weeks later, that same stock shot up to $200. Warren was devastated. That mistake taught him a lesson that would define his career. Patience is power. From that moment on, he decided he wouldn't chase quick wins. He would study companies deeply, invest in them for the long haul, and let time do the heavy lifting. Because Warren understood something most adults never learn. The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. He lived by that rule. But Warren wasn't just a boy who liked stocks. He was a born entrepreneur. As a teenager, he delivered newspapers, ran a pinball machine business in barbershops, and even bought a small farm at age 14 using his own savings. While most teens dreamed of cars and parties, Warren dreamed of compound interest. He tracked every dollar he made. He filed his first tax return at age 13. He even claimed a $35 tax deduction for his bicycle. He was serious about building wealth. But he was also calm, focused, different. Omaha may have been a small city, but it gave Warren something big. A mindset grounded in values. Hard work, honesty, discipline, and living below your means. Even after he became a billionaire, he never left Omaha. He still lives in the same house he bought in 1958 for just $31,500. Because for Warren, success was never about showing off. It was about freedom, peace of mind, and doing what he loved. No one knew it at the time, But that little boy selling gum on the streets of Omaha would one day be called the Oracle of Omaha. He would build an empire. He would rewrite the rules of investing. And he would do it all by staying true to his roots. Warren Buffett's story didn't start with money. It started with curiosity, with discipline, and with a belief that you don't have to be born rich to become wealthy. You just need to start early. Think long term. And never stop learning. Warren Buffett had always been curious about money, but nothing could prepare him for the emotional roller coaster that came with his very first stock purchase. At just 11 years old, Warren made what seemed like a bold move. He bought 3 shares of Citi Service preferred stock at $38 a share, using the savings he had carefully gathered from delivering newspapers and selling small items door to door. He wasn't alone in this decision. He bought 1 share for himself and 2 shares for his sister, Doris, making it an act of responsibility and trust. For young Warren, this wasn't just an investment, it was a test of everything he'd been reading about in financial books and newspapers. He'd studied price charts, followed business news, and felt ready to join the ranks of investors. In his mind, this was the beginning of something big. But what followed was something Warren hadn't yet learned to manage: emotions. Shortly after he bought the stock, its price fell to $27. The drop seemed like a disaster. Doubts crept in. Did he make a mistake? Had he misunderstood the business? Should he sell and cut his losses? In reality, the dip was normal, but for an 11-year-old boy who had just risked his hard-earned money, it was a gut-wrenching experience. He watched the stock price nervously each day, hoping it would rise again. And when it finally did, inching up to $40, Warren breathed a sigh of relief. Without hesitation, he sold the shares, pocketing a modest profit. He felt proud, for a moment. Just a few days later, the same stock soared to $200 a share. Warren was devastated. That small profit now looked like a missed fortune. What if he had just waited? What if he had been patient? That one moment, a flash decision made in fear, had cost him dearly. And although he was just a kid, the lesson hit him like a brick: panic and impatience can destroy great opportunities. That moment stayed with him for the rest of his life. He later said, "I made my first investment at age 11. I was wasting my life up until then." While he said it with humor, there was truth behind the joke. That early experience taught Warren something most people don't learn until much later in life, if at all. The most powerful tool in investing is patience. Instead of chasing quick wins, Warren realized that true wealth came from long-term thinking. From that moment on, he made a vow to himself: never again would he let short-term emotions override long-term logic. He immersed himself even deeper into studying businesses, not just stock prices. He wanted to understand how companies operated, what made them profitable, and why some failed while others thrived. He began to look beyond numbers on a screen or price movements in a day. He looked at the core of the business, its leadership, its products, and its potential to grow over decades, not days. One of Warren's most famous quotes, one that has echoed through the halls of financial institutions and classrooms alike, came from this exact life lesson. "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." It was a simple sentence but a profound truth. In a world where many people want instant success, quick profits, and fast results, Warren chose the opposite path, and it made him one of the richest men alive. He began to see the stock market not as a casino, but as a marketplace of ownership. When he bought a stock, he wasn't just buying a ticker symbol, he was buying a piece of a real business, with real employees, products, and customers. And if that business was strong, had good leadership, and long-term potential, he didn't care what the price did in the short term. This mindset became the foundation of Warren Buffett's investing strategy. It separated him from the crowd. While others tried to time the market, jump in and out of trades, and react to every twist in the economy, Warren stayed calm. He bought good companies and held on to them, sometimes for decades. He allowed compounding to do its work. And it all began with that first painful mistake. Ironically, the loss Warren felt from selling too soon became more valuable than the profit he would have made by holding on. That lesson became a permanent part of his philosophy, shaping the way he would handle not just investments but life itself. Years later, when people would ask him for advice, he'd often remind them, "Time is the friend of the wonderful business, and the enemy of the mediocre." And when markets crashed or stocks tumbled, Warren remained calm. He'd been there before. He understood that ups and downs were just part of the journey, and that success belonged to those who could wait. That's the power of a single moment. One choice, one mistake, and one lesson, and Warren Buffett never forgot it. Warren Buffett's childhood and teenage years laid the groundwork for a lifelong journey in investing, but his real transformation began when he came under the guidance of one of the greatest minds in finance, Benjamin Graham. Often referred to as the father of value investing, Graham wasn't just a professor, he was a philosopher of finance. His teachings would deeply influence Warren's thinking and become the cornerstone of his legendary investment strategy. After graduating from the University of Nebraska at the age of 19, Warren applied to Harvard Business School. He was rejected. Disappointed but undeterred, he soon learned that Benjamin Graham was teaching at Columbia Business School. That alone made the school more valuable to Warren than any Ivy League institution. He applied and was accepted. At Columbia, Warren devoured every word that came out of Graham's mouth. He didn't just attend lectures, he studied them like sacred texts. Graham preached the concept of value investing, the idea that investors should look for stocks that were priced below their true intrinsic value. It was like buying a dollar for 50 cents. The key, Graham taught, was to analyze a company's fundamentals, its earnings, assets, liabilities, and potential, rather than just following hype or market trends. To Warren, this made perfect sense. It was rational, logical, and disciplined, exactly the kind of framework he had been searching for. Graham's book The Intelligent Investor became his investing Bible, and one particular quote from it stuck with Warren for life. "In the short run, the market is a voting machine, but in the long run, it is a weighing machine." What that meant was simple: in the short term, stock prices could be influenced by popularity, emotion, and media buzz. But over time, a company's real worth would always shine through. After graduating, Warren wanted nothing more than to work for Graham. He offered to work for free, but Graham initially said no. It took persistence and patience, both qualities Warren had in abundance, but eventually, Graham gave him a job at Graham-Newman Corporation. For a couple of years, Warren worked under his mentor, learning not only how to find undervalued companies but also how to control the one thing that destroys most investors: emotion. And that, more than formulas or spreadsheets, was what made Warren Buffett different. Warren had an extraordinary emotional discipline. When markets plunged and investors panicked, Warren remained calm. When crowds chased trends, he paused and asked, "Does this actually make sense?" In a world where fear and greed constantly drive decisions, Warren used logic as his compass. He didn't invest in companies that were fashionable or exciting. He didn't care if they were tech giants or media favorites. In fact, Warren preferred boring businesses, ones that sold everyday products, had a consistent cash flow, and were easy to understand. Think Coca-Cola, American Express, or Gillette. Simple brands with timeless value. He once said, "The best investment is the one that looks boring today but becomes a treasure tomorrow." This was the Buffett difference. While other investors chased the next big thing, whether it was dot-com startups in the 1990s or crypto booms decades later, Warren stayed grounded in fundamentals. He looked for companies with a durable competitive advantage, honest leadership, and the ability to make money year after year. Warren's approach wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast, but it was effective. He didn't believe in risky bets or get-rich-quick schemes. He didn't buy into the idea that you had to predict the future to succeed. Instead, he focused on what he could control: how much he paid for a business, how well he understood it, and whether he was willing to hold it for the long term. He often said, "Our favorite holding period is forever." And he meant it. Once he bought a company, he treated it as if he owned the whole business. He didn't worry about what the stock did next week or next month. He looked 10, 20, even 30 years into the future. Warren also lived the life he preached. Even after becoming a billionaire, he never chased luxury. He continued to live in the modest Omaha house he bought in 1958. He drove his own car, avoided expensive habits, and famously said he preferred Coca-Cola over fine wine. His routine was simple, his choices humble, and his focus laser-sharp. To Warren, wealth wasn't about showing off, it was about freedom. The freedom to make decisions based on principle, not pressure. The freedom to do what was right, not what was popular. He wasn't trying to get rich fast. He was building wealth like a craftsman builds a cathedral, brick by brick, with patience, purpose, and unwavering belief in the process. While others rode emotional waves in media storms, Warren stood still, watching, thinking, and quietly making some of the greatest investment decisions in history. And all of it, his success, his philosophy, his billion-dollar empire, was rooted in what he learned from Benjamin Graham: buy what's undervalued, hold it patiently, and trust in time. One of the most iconic parts of Warren Buffett's journey started with a mistake. In the early 1960s, Warren bought a failing textile company, Berkshire Hathaway. Not because it was a smart investment, but out of frustration. He had agreed to sell his shares back to management, but they offered him less than they promised. Warren was furious. Instead of walking away, he did something bold. He bought more shares and took control of the company. Years later, Buffett admitted, "It was a monumentally stupid decision. The textile business was dying. Profits were shrinking. Competition was fierce. But here's the genius part. He turned his mistake into a master plan." Buffett didn't try to fix the textile business. He let it fade. Instead, he used Berkshire Hathaway as a shell to build something greater. A company that would invest in real businesses, the kind he believed in. He started slowly, strategically, with deep research behind every move. His first big bets? GEICO, American Express, The Washington Post. Companies with strong brands, steady profits, and long-term value. Then came the game changer: Coca-Cola. In 1988, Buffett began buying shares. By 1989, he owned 7% of the company. Why Coke? Not because it was flashy, but because it was timeless. People drank it in every country, every day. Buffett saw what others missed: a global brand with pricing power. And that was just the beginning. Over the years, Berkshire invested in Dairy Queen, comfort food with loyal fans. See's Candies, small company, huge profits. BNSF Railway, the backbone of U.S. freight. Apple, a tech giant with real earnings. And GEICO, the insurance company Buffett first discovered as a teenager. Each move was slow, careful, backed by data, not emotion. Buffett wasn't flipping stocks. He was buying businesses. He treated each purchase like he was buying the whole company. Because often, he was. The profits didn't just come from stock prices rising. they came from the businesses themselves. Buffett created a system. Take profits from one company and reinvest them into another. Let money compound again and again. Today, Berkshire Hathaway is worth over $800 billion. It owns dozens of businesses outright and holds billions in stocks of some of the world's biggest companies. All from a decision Buffett once called a mistake. But that's the lesson. Greatness isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you respond when you do. Warren didn't blame anyone. He didn't hide. He adapted. He used failure as fuel. That's what separates winners from the rest. In Buffett's words, the most important thing to do if you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging. But Warren didn't just stop digging. He built an empire from the bottom of that hole. Today, the name Berkshire Hathaway means integrity, patience, and powerful simplicity. Investors around the world look to Buffett as a guide. Not just on money, but on how to think. Because he proved a single mistake, handled right, can become your greatest move. Today, Warren Buffett isn't just a billionaire, he's a symbol. A symbol of patience. A symbol of discipline. And most importantly, a symbol of principled success. As of now, Buffett is one of the richest men on earth, with a net worth exceeding $130 billion. But what makes him stand out isn't just the size of his fortune, it's the way he built it. He didn't invent new technology. He didn't create a social media empire. He didn't launch rockets into space. Warren Buffett built his wealth through smart decisions, made consistently, over time. He followed simple rules and stuck to them. He didn't chase hype. He didn't care about fame. And he never lost sight of what mattered most: value. Buffett often says, "It's not necessary to do extraordinary things to get extraordinary results." That's the core of his philosophy. He built Berkshire Hathaway into one of the most powerful companies in the world, not by gambling, but by buying great businesses and letting them grow. He believed in consistency over chaos, long-term vision over short-term profits, facts over feelings. And that mindset didn't just make him rich, it made him respected. Even his lifestyle is a lesson. Warren still lives in the same modest 5-bedroom house in Omaha that he bought in 1958 for just $31,500. He drives himself to work every day. He eats at McDonald's and drinks several cans of Coca-Cola a day. He doesn't own yachts or fly in private jets. In fact, he jokes that he's more comfortable in sweatpants than a suit. Because for Warren, money was never about showing off. It was always about freedom. Freedom to do what he loved. Freedom to work with people he trusted. Freedom to give back on his own terms. And give back he did. In 2006, Buffett announced one of the largest charitable pledges in history. He committed to giving away more than 99% of his fortune to help others. Most of that is going to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which focuses on global health, poverty, and education. Every year since then, he has donated billions of dollars, quietly, without fanfare. His goal? Not to be remembered as the richest man, but as someone who used his wealth to make the world better. In fact, he once said, "If you're in the luckiest 1% of humanity, you owe it to the rest of humanity to think about the other 99%. That's what defines Warren Buffett. Not just his brilliance with numbers, but his deep sense of responsibility. He also inspired a generation of investors, from Wall Street pros to everyday people, by sharing his wisdom freely. Through books, interviews, letters, and speeches, Buffett taught the world that anyone could succeed by following a few timeless principles. Live below your means. Understand what you invest in. Don't panic in downturns. Let your money grow over time. And most importantly, never stop learning. In his 90s, Buffett still reads 5 to 6 hours a day. He's still sharp, still thoughtful, and still funny. He often says, "The more you learn, the more you earn." And despite all his success, Warren has always stayed grounded. He credits his late partner, Charlie Munger, with shaping his thinking. He praises the employees who run Berkshire's businesses. He never pretends to have all the answers. Instead, he remains humble, constantly learning, always adapting. So what's Warren Buffett's true legacy? It's not just Berkshire Hathaway, or his billions, or his legendary investments. It's the idea that you don't need luck, inheritance, or genius to build wealth. What you need is patience, discipline, integrity. He proved that even in a noisy world filled with trends, hype, and chaos, you can still win by staying calm, focused, and honest. He turned chewing gum sales into a billion-dollar mindset. He turned a failing textile company into a financial empire. He turned decades of discipline into one of the greatest fortunes in history. But he never let money define him. He once joked, "I always knew I was going to be rich. I don't think I ever doubted it for a minute." But he also knew that riches alone don't make a rich life. Kindness, wisdom, generosity, that's the real wealth. Warren Buffett didn't just become the Oracle of Omaha. He became a teacher for the world. A living example of what happens when you combine intelligence with humility and ambition with patience. In a world chasing instant success, Warren Buffett built a legacy. Brick by brick, decision by decision, year by year. And through it all, he showed us this: you don't have to move fast. You just have to move right. Closing message: what you can learn. Warren Buffett's journey proves something powerful. You don't need to be born rich to become successful. You don't need to be a genius, just be patient, consistent, and humble. You don't need fancy things to prove your worth. Real power is quiet. And most of all, the best investment you'll ever make is in yourself. He started out selling chewing gum. He ended up changing the world. So if today you feel small, unheard, or stuck, remember Warren Buffett once stood where you are. And he made it.
It's Visionary Steps 09. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Subscribe us for such as interesting videos. Thanks for watching.